A millionaire keeps his wife hidden in a mansion out of shame and goes to a party with another woman. When he gets there, something shocks him and he can't believe what he's seen. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more exciting stories like this, and like the video to keep watching. The rain was pounding against the huge windows of the mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. Thunder tore through the sky, casting brief flashes over the imposing estate. Inside the house, the silence was heavy, almost suffocating, interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of drops drumming on the glass. Emma Collins was sitting in a leather armchair in the main room, a book open on her lap, but her eyes were not fixed on the words. She stared at the page, lost in thought, while her fingers nervously turned the wedding ring. The mansion, with its impeccable decor, exuded a coldness that matched the life Emma had led for years. The crystal chandelier sparkled on the high ceiling, and paintings by renowned artists decorated the walls, but nothing there had any life, except the ghosts of the past that haunted Emma every day. She felt that the house, although majestic, was a gilded prison. A louder clap of thunder startled her, and she let the book slip to the floor. Sighing, she bent down to pick it up, but was interrupted by a sound from outside. It was a soft rustling, something that could easily be ignored on a stormy night, but Emma knew that this house was surrounded by high walls and security cameras. There shouldn't be anything out there. Still, the sound was repeated, now clearer, like metal being forced. Her heart began to race. She stood still, listening carefully, while the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Trying to control her restlessness, Emma got up slowly and went to the window. When a flash of lightning briefly illuminated the garden, she saw it. A hooded figure was moving in the darkness near the side gate. For a moment, she thought about calling the security guards, but something stopped her. There was something about the figure, the way it moved, as if it were desperate, not just trying to break in, that aroused her curiosity. She reached for the landline next to the sofa, but before she could dial, she heard a muffled voice coming from outside. "Emma?" The voice was female, and its urgency echoed through the storm. Emma froze. Who could be calling for her? For years, her life had been carefully protected by Daniel Crawford, her husband. He always said that isolation was necessary to protect her from the cruel world. She had believed him, taking him at his word as an incontestable truth. But now, someone was there, breaking the silence she had lived for so long. "Emma, I know you're there." The female voice now sounded closer. Emma put down the phone, her heart beating fast. The person knew her name. Against all logic, something inside her pushed her to open the side door leading out into the garden. The cold air and rain hit her face, but she didn't back down. Her hands trembled as she held the door open. "Who's there?" Her voice came out shaky, almost swallowed up by the sound of the storm. A woman emerged from behind a nearby tree, her drenched hair sticking to her face. Her gaze was intense, filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. "My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm a journalist. I need to talk to you." Emma instinctively stepped back, holding the door as a barrier between them. "What do you want with me? How do you know my name?" "You know very well why I'm here," said Sarah, ignoring the question. "You're Emma Collins, Daniel Crawford's invisible wife. You're a secret he keeps hidden, and you know it." Sarah's words hit Emma like a blow. She tried to convince herself that this was nonsense, but something in the journalist's expression stopped her from pushing her away immediately. "I don't know what you're talking about," Emma muttered, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Sarah stepped forward, her hand outstretched as if imploring her. "Do you think no one notices? He's isolated you, Emma. Everyone wants to know why. Your story is important. You have no idea of the impact it could have." Before Emma could reply, she heard the unmistakable sound of tires on the driveway. Headlights swept across the garden, and Sarah turned quickly, aware that her presence had been discovered. "I have to go, but I'll be back," said Sarah, before disappearing into the darkness. Emma stood there in the rain, paralyzed, as a black car drove through the gates and stopped in front of the mansion. It was Daniel. He got out of the car, with the same confident aura as always, adjusting his suit as if the storm didn't exist. "Emma?" His voice echoed through the entrance. She went back inside quickly, closing the door before he could see her outside. When he entered the room, Emma was on her feet, still trying to pull herself together. "Are you all right?" he asked, tilting his head in a casual tone, but his eyes assessed every detail, as they always did. "Yes. I was just reading," she said, trying to sound normal. Daniel smiled slightly, but his eyes didn't disguise his tiredness. "Don't wait up for me. I have work to do at the office." And with that, he left, as if she were a piece of furniture he didn't need to look at any longer. But that night was different. Sarah's words kept echoing in his mind. "You're a secret. He keeps you hidden." Emma looked at the landline, then at the window overlooking the garden. For the first time in years, a small flame of doubt ignited inside her, and she knew it wouldn't be easy to put it out. Emma spent the rest of the night awake, unable to shake off what Sarah Bennett had said. The storm outside was slowly dying down, but inside, a maelstrom was growing. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she stared into the void, as if trying to fit together the pieces of a puzzle she never realized she was putting together. Daniel had always told her that the protection and isolation were for her own good, but was it really? Or had she accepted living like this only out of fear of facing a reality that could be crueler? In the morning, sunlight streamed through the huge silk curtains, heralding a new day. Emma, however, felt that something had irreversibly changed inside her. The doubt, planted by Sarah, grew like ivy, tangling itself in every memory she had of her life with Daniel. It wasn't easy for her to confront the past, but now it seemed impossible to ignore it. Going down to breakfast, Emma found the table meticulously set, as always. Fine china plates, a selection of fresh fruit, and a steaming pot of coffee awaited her. But Daniel's presence dominated the atmosphere. He was sitting at the head of the table, reading the newspaper, as he did every morning. His face seemed impenetrable, but Emma noticed a subtle tension in his shoulders. He didn't look at her when she came in, but spoke without taking his eyes off the page in front of him. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice sharp as a razor. "Yes," Emma replied automatically, although they both knew it was a lie. "Good." He turned the page of the newspaper with excessive calm. "I'll be away all day today, a meeting with investors in Manhattan." Emma nodded, but her mind was far away. The silence between them was deafening. Daniel seemed satisfied with the control he exerted over the conversation, while Emma felt the distance between them growing. When he finished his coffee and left without even looking back, Emma realized that she was alone, really alone. It wasn't his physical absence that bothered her, but the realization that, emotionally, Daniel hadn't been a part of her life for a long time. Determined to understand more about Sarah Bennett, Emma went upstairs to her bedroom and picked up her tablet. She sat on the edge of the bed and typed the journalist's name into the search field. There were several results, but one article caught her eye. The woman behind the allegations that brought down powerful businessmen. Emma clicked on the link and started reading, feeling her stomach turn with each line. Sarah was known for exposing stories of corruption, abuse of power, and corporate scandals. The article mentioned that she had been threatened numerous times for revealing the secrets of influential men, but had never backed down. A sentence highlighted in the text seemed to scream at Emma. "Sarah Bennett doesn't fear the silence they try to impose on her. She breaks it." Emma closed the tablet, her heart pounding. Why was Sarah interested in her life? What did she know about Daniel? And above all, why did Emma feel a twinge of hope in the midst of so much confusion? Restlessness led her to the garden, where the rain of the night before had left a fresh smell of wet earth. Walking among the impeccably tended flowers, she tried to organize her thoughts. Sarah had said she would be back. Should Emma wait for her? Look for her? As she reflected, the sound of footsteps on the grass caught her attention. Turning around, she found Clara, the housekeeper, holding an envelope. "This was left at the gate, ma'am," said Clara, handing Emma the envelope. Emma frowned as she took it. There was no sender, just her name written in firm letters. Tearing the side carefully, she found a folded sheet of paper. The handwritten note was direct and alarming. "Emma, your story can change lives. Don't ignore it. If you want answers, meet me tonight at the Blue Ridge Cafe at 7 p.m. Don't tell anyone. Sarah." Emma felt her heart race. Was this an invitation or a trap? The caution that Daniel had always instilled in her screamed at her to throw the note away and forget the whole thing. But another part, a deeper part, insisted that she had to go. Something was being kept from her, and the only way to find out was to face the unknown. When Daniel returned home in the late afternoon, Emma had already made up her mind. She feigned disinterest while he talked about the details of their meeting. He didn't mention anything about the note or Sarah, which confirmed to Emma that he didn't know about the meeting. For the first time, Emma felt that she was standing in front of Daniel, a feeling that was both liberating and terrifying. Daniel locked himself in his office. He said he still had to work. At 6:30 p.m., she grabbed a simple coat and went downstairs in silence. Her driver was at the door, as always, waiting to take her wherever she needed to go. "I need to go to the Blue Ridge Cafe," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The driver, surprised by her unusual choice, just nodded. The journey was short, but the tension in Emma's chest made it seem like an eternity. When the car pulled up in front of the cafe, a small, cozy establishment hidden among the streets of Manhattan, Emma hesitated before getting out. She took a deep breath and went inside. The atmosphere was cozy, with warm lights and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. In the far corner, she saw Sarah sitting at a table looking at her with a mixture of determination and urgency. Emma approached slowly, as if each step was a battle against her own fears. "You came," said Sarah, standing up and offering her hand. Emma squeezed her hand, feeling her cold skin. "I'm here. Now tell me, what do you want from me?" Sarah gestured for her to sit down. "I don't want anything from you, Emma. I want to help you see the truth." "What truth?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locked on Emma's. "The truth about Daniel, about why he keeps you hidden, about what he's afraid you'll find out." Emma felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. Before she could answer, Sarah pulled a folder out of her bag and placed it on the table. Inside this folder are documents that prove who Daniel really is. If you're ready to see it, your life will never be the same again. Emma looked at the folder, hesitating. Sarah's words echoed like a promise and a warning. Was she prepared to open that door and face what she might find? Her heart was pounding so loudly that she could almost hear the sound. Sarah was silent, her eyes attentive, waiting for Emma to make a decision. "If I open that," Emma muttered, "there's no going back, is there?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice calm but charged with urgency. "You already know there's no going back, Emma. Whatever you think you have now, it's not real. You're living in a prison. Opening that folder isn't the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of a fresh start." Emma felt Sarah's words pierce her chest like tiny blades. For so long, she had accepted her life as an absolute truth. Daniel had been her protector, her guide, but now every memory she had of him seemed distorted, like a reflection in a broken mirror. Her fingers hesitated over the edge of the folder. Finally, she opened it. Inside were a series of documents, photos, and news clippings. Emma slowly flipped through the pages, each one revealing something more disturbing than the last. There were financial records showing shady transactions, contracts with questionable clauses, and even emails exchanged between Daniel and other businessmen where her name was mentioned in a casual and calculating way. But it was one photo that made Emma freeze. In it, Daniel was standing next to a beautiful young woman, embracing her intimately. His smile was carefree, while the woman held a glass of champagne in one hand, and the other was resting on Daniel's chest. "Who is she?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "Lauren Fitzgerald," Sarah replied. "She's a socialite from Los Angeles. They've been in a relationship for months, maybe even longer." Emma closed her eyes, trying to contain the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to engulf her. "That can't be true," she muttered. "Daniel would never do that." Sarah placed a gentle hand over hers. "I know this is hard to accept, Emma, but you need to understand. Not only is he betraying you emotionally, he's also using your isolation to make sure you never find out what he really is." Emma shook her head, as if she could push Sarah's words away. But the weight of the evidence before her was overwhelming. Every detail, every document, every photo painted a portrait of Daniel that she didn't want to recognize. "Why are you showing me this?" Emma asked, staring at Sarah with watery eyes. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Sarah replied. "And because your story has the power to expose not only Daniel, but the entire system of manipulation and control that he represents. There are so many women trapped in situations like yours, thinking they are being protected when, in fact, they are being silenced." Emma leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of it all. Tears ran silently down her face. She had felt empty for so long, but now the pain seemed to fill every space inside her. "What if he finds out I've been here?" Emma finally asked, her voice a whisper. "He'll find out," Sarah said sincerely. "Daniel is clever, but he only keeps control because you let him. The question you need to ask yourself is, are you ready to get your life back?" Emma didn't answer straight away. She looked up at the cafe window, where the city lights shone brightly. For the first time, it felt like the world outside was within her reach, even if it was scary and unknown. When Emma finally spoke again, there was a new determination in her voice. "If I do this," she said, "I want to make sure it's for me, and not just to destroy Daniel." Sarah smiled slightly. "That's the right answer." Emma drove back to the mansion with her mind racing. The driver didn't ask any questions, but seemed suspicious of her distant expression. Climbing the stairs to the bedroom, she found the space more oppressive than ever. The huge bed, the decorated walls, the luxurious furniture, everything felt like a gilded cage. Daniel was still in his office. He hadn't even noticed that Emma had left. He sat on the edge of the bed and spread out the documents in his briefcase on the bedspread. Every photo, every written line was a reminder of how his life had been manipulated. But in the midst of all the pain, a new emotion began to emerge. Anger, not a destructive anger, but an anger that fed a silent strength. She knew that Daniel would notice her change in behavior, and indeed, the next day, he did. "You look different," he commented over breakfast, tilting his head as if trying to read her mind. Emma kept her expression neutral, but inside, she was on alert. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Make sure you're not doing something you'll regret." The words sounded like a threat, but Emma held his gaze. For once, she didn't back down. That afternoon, Emma began to plan. She knew that confronting Daniel directly would be pointless. He was cunning, with resources and contacts that could crush her if he wanted to. But now Emma had an ally in Sarah. 2 days later, Sarah called. "I have more information for you," she said, "but we need to be careful. Daniel is getting suspicious. Let's meet somewhere more discreet this time." Emma hesitated. Meeting Sarah again was risky, but curiosity and the need for answers were stronger than fear. "I'll be there," she replied, then hung up. That evening, Emma drove to the address Sarah had given her, a community library outside the city. It was a simple, discreet place, but perfect for a conversation that needed privacy. When Emma arrived, Sarah was already waiting in the children's reading section, away from prying eyes. "We need to act fast," Sarah said bluntly. "Daniel is moving financial assets, and that means he's up to something, perhaps a public ouster, or worse. And I have a trusted person working inside his company, and I know everything." Emma frowned. "What do you mean, worse?" Sarah hesitated before answering. "There's a chance that he'll try to discredit you publicly. If you start taking a stand, he might want to destroy your reputation before you have a chance to speak. All this because he's already suspicious that I'm looking into his life. He has a lot of contacts." The revelation left Emma stunned. She had never considered that Daniel would go to such lengths to preserve his image. But at the same time, it only solidified her decision not to keep quiet any longer. "And what do I do?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "You start by telling the truth," said Sarah. "That will disarm him." Emma returned home still full of doubt. She knew the next few weeks would be difficult, and the battle ahead would be more challenging than anything she had ever faced. When she looked in the mirror that night, she saw something she hadn't seen for years, a woman with a spark of life in her eyes. She knew Daniel wouldn't give up control easily, but she also knew that she was ready to figure everything out the smart way. Emma carefully closed the door to her room, the muffled sound of her footsteps echoing in the heavy silence of the mansion. She had decided not to confront Daniel yet. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream, to throw the whole truth on the table and demand explanations. But the fear of his reaction and the public repercussions held her back. It wasn't just about her. It was about the weight of carrying his surname, the public figure he had built up, and her own emotional security, which, however fragile, was still her anchor. She sat on the floor, leaning against the side of the bed, and let the silence envelop her. The mansion, with its immaculate opulence, suddenly seemed suffocating, every luxurious detail reminding her of what she had lost over the years. With her eyes fixed on a velvet armchair in the corner of the room, Emma felt her mind being pulled back into the past. Before Daniel, before the jewelry, before the gala parties and the custom-designed clothes, there was Emma Bennett, an ordinary girl with simple dreams and a heart full of hope. She clearly remembered the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the sweet smell of freshly baked croissants. The little coffee shop on the corner of a simple Boston neighborhood was more than just a job. It was the place where Emma dreamed, where she imagined herself doing something big with her life. "Bennett, focus!" The voice of her supervisor, Maggie, echoed in her memory. Emma, always smiling, straightened her apron and went back to serving customers with the same contagious energy that made her adored by the regulars. It was there, in that little refuge between cups and cramped tables, that she met Daniel. He walked in one spring afternoon, wearing an impeccable suit and a smile that seemed designed to hypnotize. Emma, holding a tray of dishes, barely had time to notice his presence before she heard the deep sound of his voice. "Excuse me, can you recommend something?" Emma looked at him and felt a slight warmth creep up her face. He was unlike anyone else who frequented the place. Tall, confident, with an air of someone who belonged to a world far beyond that cramped cafe. "If you like something strong, I suggest espresso. If you prefer something sweet, we have the cappuccino with hazelnut cream that everyone loves." He laughed, a soft, charming sound. "I trust your taste. Cappuccino, then." The interaction was brief but striking. In the days that followed, Daniel began to frequent the cafe regularly, and with each visit, his conversations with Emma became longer and more personal. He asked about her dreams, about what she wanted for the future, and listened with an attentiveness that made her feel important in a way that no one else had ever done. "You have potential, Emma," he said once, as he turned the coffee cup in his hand. "You should be living something much bigger than this." At the time, his words felt like an open door to a new world. She had begun to see him as a modern prince, someone who could take her out of the monotony of her simple life and into something extraordinary. When he invited her to dinner at an elegant restaurant in the city center, Emma almost refused, unsure about fitting in at such a sophisticated place. But Daniel insisted, saying that she deserved to experience the best that life had to offer. At that dinner, he wrapped her up in his vision of a future where she would never have to worry about money, where the world would be at her feet. He talked about travel, comfort, and stability, all with an intense gaze that made Emma forget her own fears. The transition into his world was quick and intense. Daniel introduced her to a lifestyle she had never imagined. Expensive clothes, dinners in exclusive places, lavish parties where she could barely follow the conversations. At first it was exciting, an adventure that seemed like a dream. But over time, the glow began to fade, revealing a darker side to that fairy tale. Daniel was kind and generous in public, but in private, rules began to emerge. You can't wear that. It doesn't go with the event. Don't talk about your childhood. That's not relevant. You need to learn how to behave at these dinners. Emma tried to adjust. She thought she was being polished, transformed into a more refined version of herself. But little by little, she realized that she was disappearing. Back in the present, Emma felt hot tears roll down her face. She had molded herself so much to fit into Daniel's world that she hardly recognized who she was before him. Getting up from the floor, she walked over to the mirror in the bedroom. The reflection she saw stared back at her with tired eyes and shoulders bowed under the weight of years of conformity. Where was the young woman who believed in her own dreams? A knock on the door made her turn sharply. It was the maid, telling her that dinner was served. Emma thanked her but didn't move. She couldn't go downstairs and face Daniel as if nothing was happening. She sat back down on the bed, hugging her knees. For the first time in years, Emma wondered if the life she had built with Daniel was worth the price she had paid. Being invisible, a shadow in someone else's life, was not what she had imagined when she left the cafe that spring afternoon with his phone number scribbled on a napkin. But what to do now? If she wasn't ready to face Daniel, she needed to at least prepare herself. With each passing day, Emma felt the conflict growing inside her. She wanted answers, but she also feared the consequences of seeking them. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to meet again. I have something that could change everything." Emma stared at the screen, feeling her heart race. What did Sarah have now? And more importantly, was she ready to listen? Emma put her phone back on the bedside table, refusing to answer Sarah's message. Although the journalist's words still echoed in her mind, something felt wrong. Sarah was too determined, as if she had something to gain beyond simply helping. It wasn't just curiosity, it felt personal, almost like revenge masquerading as concern. Emma didn't want to be used as a piece in someone else's game. She needed space to think for herself. As tempting as it was to have someone willing to unravel the mystery behind Daniel's behavior, Emma felt it was a path she needed to walk alone. Determined, she hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and went to the window. The mansion was plunged into silence, but the night seemed more alive than ever. There was something different in the air, a feeling that changes were about to happen. The next morning, Emma woke up with a purpose she hadn't felt for a long time. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she knew she needed to get out of that house and find something that would help her reconnect with herself. While drinking coffee, she remembered an article she had read months ago about a community center for women that offered support to victims of emotional and psychological abuse. The name was simple, but full of hope: Haven's Path. Without telling anyone, Emma grabbed a coat, stuffed her cell phone in her pocket, and asked the driver to take her there. During the journey, her heart was racing. What exactly was she hoping to find? Help? Support? Perhaps just a place where she could be heard without fear of judgment. When she arrived, the facade of the building was modest but welcoming. The walls were decorated with vibrant murals, painted by women who had passed through. The words, "Haven's Path," were written in large letters over the entrance, accompanied by a symbol of leaves that seemed to intertwine as a representation of growth and unity. As she entered, she was greeted by the sound of laughter and low voices, mixed with the faint smell of coffee and fresh paint. A tall woman with a warm expression approached, extending her hand. "Welcome. I'm Rachel Carter, the center's coordinator. What can I do for you?" Emma hesitated for a moment, but something about Rachel's presence reassured her. She seemed serene but firm, like someone who understood the weight of what women carried when they entered the center. I just wanted to know more about the work you do here," replied Emma, trying to keep her voice steady. Rachel smiled and gestured for her to follow. As they walked through the corridors, Rachel explained that the center offered support groups, training workshops, and even therapy programs to help women rebuild their lives. "We all have a story," said Rachel, stopping in front of a room where a group of women were gathered in a circle. Here, they have the chance to share it without fear, without judgment. Emma felt a lump in her throat when she heard those words. As she looked at the women in the room, she saw faces marked by difficult experiences, but also by an evident strength. It was impossible not to wonder what her life would have been like if she had found this place earlier. Rachel continued the tour, showing the center's library, where books on female empowerment and stories of overcoming filled the shelves. In a room next door, women were learning new skills, such as sewing and graphic design. These workshops are more than training, Rachel explained. They are a way of showing them that they have value, that they are capable of creating something meaningful. Emma felt a mixture of admiration and melancholy. It was as if she had found a piece of herself in that place, a part that Daniel had erased. Before leaving, Rachel took her to a wall decorated with photos and messages. "Here's our mural of achievements," she said. "Each photo represents a woman who has found her strength. Each message is proof that however difficult it may seem, there is always a way." Emma stood in silence, reading the handwritten messages. Some were short, others long, but they all had one thing in common: hope. "I'd like to come back," Emma said at last. "You're always welcome," replied Rachel, putting her hand on her shoulder. When Emma returned home, she found Daniel in his office. He was on the phone, but hung up as soon as he saw her enter. His eyes immediately narrowed. "You left without warning," he said, his voice controlled but laden with reproach. "Yes, I had to sort some things out," Emma replied, trying to keep her tone casual. "Where were you?" Emma hesitated. For the first time, she decided she wouldn't lie. "I went to visit a community center." Daniel laughed, but the sound was humorless. "A community center? Emma, do you know how that can seem to people if they find out? You, Daniel Blake's wife, going to a place like that? It's inappropriate." She felt her blood boil. For years, she had accepted comments like that without question. But now, something inside her was changing. Inappropriate for whom, Daniel? For you. Because for me, it was the first time in a long time that I felt I was doing something that mattered. He crossed his arms, his tone hardening. "You're not going back there. I'm done giving space to these daydreams." Emma lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his firmly. "I'm going back, and you can't stop me." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Daniel looked shocked, as if he had never imagined that Emma would dare to face him. She, on the other hand, felt a mixture of fear and liberation. "Emma," he said at last, "I'm trying to protect her." "Protect her?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You're not protecting me, Daniel. You're erasing me, and I'm not going to let you do that anymore." Without waiting for an answer, Emma left the office, leaving Daniel alone with his anger and confusion. That night, as Emma lay in bed, she felt something new: courage. For the first time, she had stood up to Daniel, and even though the consequences were uncertain, she knew she wouldn't back down. The days following the confrontation in the office were fraught with tension. Daniel watched Emma with a mixture of concern and worry. She was different, more confident, with a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen for years. What worried him even more was the fact that she kept visiting the community center, something he couldn't control. Emma, for her part, was determined to explore this new path. Every visit to Haven's Path was a reminder that she was not alone and that she could find the strength to rewrite her story. Rachel, with her calm wisdom, had become a mentor. The stories shared by the other women at the center were fuel for her growing courage. Daniel began to notice the subtle changes. Emma no longer backed away from his criticism. She faced him directly, something that made him uncomfortable. He tried to disguise his frustration with grandiose gestures, such as expensive gifts and empty promises, but Emma was no longer impressed. The truth was that she was finding something in the community center that he could never offer: freedom. Meanwhile, Sarah kept trying to get in touch. Emma finally replied, but firmly, "Sarah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need to make my decisions my way. When I'm ready to act, I'll be in touch." On the other end of the line, Sarah sighed. recognizing that she had no choice but to wait. One afternoon, when she was looking for a book in the mansion's library, Emma saw the door to Daniel's office ajar. It was a place she had avoided for years, associating it with oppression and control. But something drew her in. On the desk, scattered among documents and reports, was a formal invitation to a lavish social event. Emma took the paper in her hands, reading the details carefully. Daniel would go alone, as he always did. But at that moment, Emma made a decision that surprised her. She would go too, but by surprise. In the days leading up to the event, Emma carefully planned her appearance. She sought out Sarah and reluctantly asked for her help. "I'm going to the event," said Emma. "I need someone to record what happens. Can you do that?" Sarah readily agreed, her determination almost as strong as Emma's. When evening came, Emma put on an elegant black dress she had bought years ago, but never worn. Looking in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. There was strength in her eyes, something she thought she had lost. Meanwhile, at the event, Daniel was sitting at a central table next to Olivia Harper, his stunning young lover. They were laughing and chatting like a couple in love, completely oblivious to the storm that was approaching. Emma's entrance was discreet, but her presence was impossible to ignore. People recognized her immediately, whispering among themselves as she walked through the hall. Sarah was standing by, her camera ready to record every moment. Emma approached Daniel's table, her heart beating wildly, but her face remaining serene. When she got close enough, Daniel looked up, freezing at the sight of her. Olivia, sensing his reaction, turned to look, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath. "Good evening, Daniel," said Emma, her voice firm. "Emma," he began, trying to pull himself together. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I'd come and support my husband," she replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Olivia, visibly uncomfortable, looked from Daniel to Emma. "Daniel, what's going on?" Before he could answer, one of the guests, clearly intrigued by Emma's presence, commented loud enough for everyone to hear. "So that's the famous Emma Blake." The murmuring intensified, and Olivia finally exploded. "Famous for what exactly? For being the invisible wife while he parades me around?" The room fell into an awkward silence. Emma seized the moment to take the next step. "Maybe you should ask Daniel," she said, looking directly at Olivia. "He's very good at creating convenient versions of the truth." Olivia, feeling betrayed, got up from the table. "Is that right, Daniel? You lied to me too. You said your wedding was just a formality." Daniel tried to defuse the situation, but it was too late. Olivia continued, her voice gaining strength. "You're a manipulator, Daniel, controlling and selfish. And you know what? I've had enough." Those words were like a blow to Daniel, but he didn't have time to react. Sarah, who had recorded everything, was already posting the video on social media. "I hope the world sees who you really are," said Olivia before leaving the room, leaving Daniel alone to face the stares and the increasingly loud murmurs. Emma, for her part, looked at him one last time, her voice low but full of determination. "For years you've erased me, Daniel, but it's over. I will no longer be a shadow in your life." Without waiting for an answer, she turned and left the room, feeling lighter with every step. Sarah followed her, holding her cell phone like a trophy. "You were amazing," said Sarah. "This isn't about revenge, Sarah," replied Emma. "It's about freedom." By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Social media was full of messages of support for Emma, and Daniel's name was on every news site. He tried desperately to control the narrative, but it was impossible. Rachel called Emma, asking if she would consider sharing her story on Haven's Path. "You're an inspiration, Emma. Women need to hear your voice." For the first time, Emma didn't hesitate. "I accept." The days after the confrontation at the social event were a whirlwind for Emma. The pressure of social media and the repercussions of Sarah's video made it impossible to continue living under the same roof as Daniel. After a tense conversation, Daniel decided to leave home and stay in a hotel. For Emma, this was the beginning of a freedom she had only just begun to understand. The mansion, which had been a gilded prison for so long, now seemed different. There was still a sense of emptiness in the silent corridors, but Emma began to fill it with new meanings. She dedicated her days to Haven's path, finding a purpose that had previously seemed unattainable. The community center was organizing a special event that weekend, where women shared their stories of overcoming. Rachel asked Emma to speak. She felt she needed to use her voice not only for herself, but for all the women who still lived in silence. On the morning of the event, Emma chose a simple but elegant dress. She looked at herself in the mirror, remembering the woman who once believed that her life was defined by someone else's choices. Now, she was learning that her choices were her own. The hall of the community center was full. Women of different ages and backgrounds gathered, some with anxious looks on their faces, others full of hope. Rachel introduced Emma with a warm smile, highlighting the strength she had shown in recent weeks. Emma took to the small stage, holding the microphone with slightly trembling hands. She took a deep breath before starting. For a long time, I lived a life that seemed perfect to others but was suffocating for me. I settled. I believed that silence was the best option, and I allowed other people to define who I was. The eyes in the audience were fixed on her, and Emma continued, "But silence traps us. It makes us forget who we are and prevents us from seeing the value we have. I discovered this recently, and although I'm still learning, I can already say that I will never accept living in silence again." Emotion filled the room. Some women discreetly wiped away tears while others nodded, connecting with Emma's words. If you're here today, maybe you're looking for something that seems impossible. I mean that it is possible. It won't be easy, but it's worth it. Because we deserve to be seen, heard, and respected. Our stories matter. Applause filled the hall. Sarah, who was in the audience, recorded everything with her phone, ensuring that Emma's words reached a much wider audience. After the speech, Emma was surrounded by women who wanted to share their stories. Some asked for advice, others just wanted to thank her for inspiring them. Rachel approached and hugged her. "You were amazing," said Rachel. "Your story is giving strength to so many people." That same evening, the video of Emma speaking at the event was posted on social media by Sarah. Within hours, it went viral again. Newspapers and television channels began covering the story of the woman who broke away from an oppressive marriage and found her voice. Emma Blake's name became synonymous with strength and overcoming. While Emma received messages of support from people all over the country, Daniel watched from afar. From the hotel room where he was staying, he watched the video, feeling a mixture of pride and regret. He knew he had lost something valuable and began to wonder if there was still a way back. Daniel decided to try to reach out again. He sent messages to Emma, first with shy apologies, then with attempts to arrange a meeting. Emma read the messages, but was slow to reply. When she finally did, her reply was clear. "Daniel, I appreciate the effort, but my life will no longer be defined by you. I'm on a different path now, and I need to stay on it." While Emma continued on her journey, Olivia also started down a new path. After the public confrontation, she decided to leave Daniel behind. For years, she had believed that their relationship was the promise of something great. But now she saw that it was just an illusion. Olivia moved into a small apartment and started volunteering at a women's shelter. She found purpose in helping other people, something she had never experienced before. For the first time, she felt like she was discovering who she really was, away from Daniel's shadows. Emma and Olivia no longer had direct contact, but their journeys seemed connected. Both were reinventing themselves, learning to value themselves and leaving behind the standards that others had imposed on them. Later that week, Rachel called Emma with exciting news. The community center had received a large anonymous donation, which would allow it to expand its programs and reach even more women. "You won't believe it," said Rachel. "It was Daniel who made the donation." Emma was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. She didn't know how she felt about it. Was it a genuine gesture of regret or just another attempt to control the narrative? That evening, Emma sat in front of the mansion's fireplace and wrote in her diary. My life is changing, and although I still have doubts and fears, I know I'm on the right track. Freedom is scary, but it's also powerful, and I will never give it up." As he reread his words, he thought of Sarah, that woman who had knocked on her door with the courage of someone who holds the truth in her hands. Emma remembered with clarity the initial mistrust, the accusations, the shocks of reality that Sarah had brought to light. At first, it seemed impossible to accept that the perfect world she had built was falling apart. But Sarah didn't give up. She didn't even back down. At the opening event of the new branch of the Voices United Center, Sarah was in the audience, sitting in the back, with the smile of someone who doesn't need to stand out to know that she was essential. At the end of her speech, Emma came down from the stage and walked over to her. "You changed my life, Sarah, and I'll never forget that." Sarah looked bewildered by the recognition. "I only did what needed to be done, Emma. You did everything else." Emma squeezed her hand and replied, with tears in her eyes, "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. The truth. Thank you for not giving up on me." That moment was small, almost imperceptible to everyone else, but for both of them it meant everything. As for Daniel, his path had been more complicated. After leaving home, he faced the weight of his mistakes head-on. At first, he tried to convince Emma to remarry, but realized that this would only be possible if he really changed. She had made it clear that she would not live in anyone's shadow again. For months, Daniel sought therapy, something he had previously considered unnecessary. Through the sessions, he began to understand the reasons for his controlling behavior, the insecurities he hid under the mask of power. When he heard about Emma's work at Voices United, he decided he wanted to contribute, not just to try to redeem himself, but because deep down he admired what she was building. He began to discreetly attend events, offered financial support to the project, and used his connections to get new sponsors. However, Daniel knew that it wasn't enough just to help with money or influence. He needed to show Emma that he was willing to change. "I don't expect you to forgive me, or to want to try again," he said, in a rare moment when he was able to speak to her alone. "But I want you to know that everything I do now is because I believe in what you're building." Emma didn't reply immediately. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution. She knew Daniel was trying, but the fear of being suffocated again still hung over her. "If you really want to change, Daniel, don't do it for me. Do it for you." Daniel nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. And for the first time, he didn't try to argue. As time went by, Daniel continued to work on behalf of Voices United, helping to make it possible for the project to expand to other cities. He remained respectful, keeping his distance and letting Emma define the boundaries between them. At the opening event of the branch in their hometown, Daniel was present, but in the background, as he had promised. When Emma finished her speech, she found him at the back of the hall, watching everything with a serene expression. "You did an incredible job," he said as she approached. Emma sighed, feeling torn. Part of her recognized Daniel's genuine effort, but another part knew that her journey was about rediscovering herself. "Thank you," she replied sincerely. "I appreciate what you've done for the center, for the project, for me." He smiled, a restrained smile but full of meaning. "It doesn't matter what happens between us, Emma. I just want you to know that I'll always be there for you." She nodded, feeling that that chapter was finally closing, even if a new kind of relationship could be born from it, one of mutual respect and understanding. As Emma walked through the Voices United Center, seeing the joy of the people around her, she realized that her life was complete in a way she had never imagined. It wasn't the idealized happy ending she had hoped for years ago, but it was a rebirth. Looking at Sarah, Rachel, and even Daniel, she understood that they had all played important roles in her journey, and that made her realize that no one builds their story alone. With the book Rebirth gaining international prominence and Voices United expanding its reach, Emma knew that her mission was just beginning. She had found her voice, and now it was her turn to help other women find theirs. Standing in the center of that space full of life and possibilities, Emma felt a peace she had never experienced before. Her past no longer defined who she was. She was free, and that was just the beginning. So, what did you think of this moving story? Share your opinion in the comments. We'd love to know what you think. Don't forget to like the video to support us and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.